This train's bound for glory, this train. This train is bound for glory, this train. This train is bound for glory, don't carry nothing but the righteous and the holy. This train is bound for glory, this train.
And this train don't carry no gamblers, this train. This train don't carry no gamblers, this train. This train don't carry no gamblers, lies, thieves, big shot ramblers. This train don't carry no gamblers, this train.
This train don't carry no lies, this train. This train don't carry no lies, this train. This train don't carry no lies, she's streamlined on a midnight fire. This train don't carry no lies, this train. Well, this train don't carry no smokers, this train. This train don't carry no smokers, this train. This train don't carry no smokers, two-bit lies and small-time jokers. This train don't carry no smokers, this train.
This train don't care no comment, this train. This train don't care no comment, this train. This train don't care no comment, wheelie dealer, here and gone. This train don't care no comment, this train. This train don't carry no rustlers, this train. This train don't carry no rustlers, this train. This train don't carry no rustlers, side street workers, two-bit hustlers. This train don't carry no rustlers, this train.
Glory, this train. This train is bound for glory, this train. This train is bound for glory, don't carry nothing but the righteous and the holy. This train is bound for glory, this train. This train is bound for glory, this train. This train is bound for glory, this train.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name's Julie McCrossan, and this is Deaf Sign Clapping, and I'm clapping you for coming today to help to build positive results and make changes, positive changes for people living with Huntington's disease and their families. Welcome to this Huntington's Australian National Conference 2021. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm broadcasting to you today on Aboriginal land, the land of the Gadigal people, here in the Sydney Basin. And I'd also like to say that Lewis Kaplan, the Chief Executive Officer of Huntington's New South Wales ACT, who's been so instrumental in this conference. This is our fourth session, our fourth and final webinar, that Lewis is also taking care of the whole technical side and will join us shortly. And he is also on Gadigal land. And that marvellous music by Bruce Hearn, a tribute to Woody Guthrie, the famous American folk singer who lived with Huntington's disease, and his second wife played an instrumental role in the foundation of Huntington's Disease Society of America. And you'd know that Woody Guthrie was a huge influence on Bob Dylan and so many other people. Well, ladies and gentlemen, our theme today is really about advocacy for change. It's about what can we do as individuals, as families, and in coalition with others to improve the lives of people living with Huntington's. You will be sent as registrants a recording of this session. All the sessions have been recorded, and they will be available on the Huntington's New South Wales ACT website for people who've registered for the conference. And then a little bit later, in a few weeks' time, they'll be generally available to the world on YouTube. Just before I begin, I want to thank our sponsor, Roche, and also the support we've received from the Australian Government's National Disability Conference Initiative. And also thank you to our exhibitor, Novacore, who makes specialist beds and chairs for people living with Huntington's. And they did a display, a digital Zoom display on our first webinar. My apologies for my slightly awkward smile. I've had dental treatment this morning, and I had hoped the anesthesia would wear off in time, but I'm afraid it hasn't. Quick housekeeping, we have 3 speakers, 30 minutes each. We welcome questions or comments. You can see the Q&A button on the bottom. You can put it in chat as well, but Q&A is the normal place. And I'll be monitoring them. We can't see you or hear you. So for your questions or comments to be shared with others, you do need to put them in the Q&A or in the chat. And if you have a comment to make about how we can be more effective advocates for people living with Huntington's and their families, and you don't want to ask a question, your comment is most welcome, and I can read it out to the group, and anonymous questions and comments are most welcome. So after our 3 speakers, I'll be inviting people back together, and we will answer your questions and talk about, what can we do? What are the recommendations of our panel in relation to future coalition engagement and working together in advocacy? So we'll also have a very special guest panel member from Western Australia. So it gives me great pleasure now to introduce our first speaker, who is different from the scheduled speaker, and I'll let Lewis Kaplan explain. Our first speaker today is Lewis himself, the CEO of Huntington's New South Wales ACT, and Lewis has extensive experience in senior leadership roles in health, aged care and services for people with a disability. His background originally was in health science and public health. So welcome to you, Lewis, and you can explain your appearance. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Good day, everybody. I'm so sorry that Charles Sabine, who was the advertised speaker, is not available. He's indisposed and hasn't been able to participate in this conference. Sends his sincere apologies. So I'm going to do my best to, and we've got a huge pair of shoes to fill, and I'm going to do my best to try to do justice to the presentation that Charles would have made, knowing that he's a highly skilled professional. So what I'm going to do is just share my screen, and hopefully you can now see. Let's make that full. There we are. Now, so I'm standing in for Charles, and really in a very mediocre way, I guess. What I'd like to do is actually say a few words about Charles and why it was we invited him to the conference. Charles found out as an adult that he had Huntington's in his family. His father was diagnosed at a relatively later age. And his brother, this is a picture of him with his brother, who was already manifest with Huntington's disease back in 2010. Charles had for many years been an award-winning journalist, a foreign correspondent with NBC. And in 2010, with his brother deteriorating, he decided that he should have the test, found out that he also was gene positive, and a couple of years later made a very significant life decision to give up being a foreign correspondent and to embrace the Huntington's world and become what is in effect we're now calling a global HD advocate. He's been a spokesman both for the UK and the USA national associations. He's spoken all over the place in international conferences, national conferences. He was going to speak here today. He has done a keynote just recently for the CHDI, the large research organization in the States that invests about 100 million a year in Huntington's research. They've had a keynote speaker for the last 6 or 7 years now, who's been a person from a Huntington's family, so a consumer. And what Charles did was actually to interview all of those consumers, all those people who gave keynote addresses, and ask them to talk about their keynote and what's happened since the keynote was delivered. That should become public, I think, in a few weeks' time, once the CHDI conference material has been uploaded to its website. Certainly worth having a look at. Charles also participated in making a really important documentary about 8 or 9 years ago called Alive and Well, a documentary telling the story of 7 different people who were in one way or another part of the Huntington's disease community. That film is available for all to see for free. If you just click on the link to aliveandwellthefilm.com, you will be able to watch that, and I highly recommend that as a worthwhile use of your time. In more recent times, Charles got involved with a group called Hidden No More. The website is HDDEN No More, hidden without HD being obviously Huntington's disease. And Hidden No More has really become an important source of global effort to try to reduce stigma, shame, and discrimination, because I've only been working in the Huntington's world now for 2.5 years, but I've realized that this is a disease that has been, people living with Huntington's families have had stigma for many generations, and it's forced them in some respects to hide in shame. We now understand that it's nobody's fault that you have Huntington's. This is a terrible progressive neurological condition which is inherited, and we need action to reverse the stigma and to improve the quality of life of all people affected by Huntington's disease. So Hidden No More is an international group that works to that end. And they, would have started back in 2016, decided that they thought it might be a nice idea to ask the Pope to have an audience with a person with Huntington's disease. The idea grew and grew a bit like a snowball and ended up on the 18th of May with an audience of almost 3,000 people connected to the Huntington's community meeting the Pope. It was the first time a head of state had met with a group of people with Huntington's disease, and a select few, all from poor countries, Venezuela and Colombia primarily, and some from villages where people had never actually left the country before, and sometimes not even their own region. The amazing journey for them, they were organized to fly from wherever they were to Rome. They were accommodated at the Vatican, and they met the Pope. It was an amazing day. We actually showed the documentary online last year in May, and I think in August, but it's now freely available at dancingatthevatican.com. And again, I would highly recommend anybody interested in seeing how this global advocacy worked at the Vatican, with people embracing the Pope embracing them back and blessing them. Dancingatthevatican.com is a wonderful documentary and well worth you spending some time watching it. Now, I do hope Charles will be feeling okay soon, and that he will continue his work empowering the HD community and empowering HD consumers. This session is called Achieving Better Outcomes for Consumers. So I wanted first of all to, I guess, give a couple of definitions. The first one was, what is a consumer? A consumer could also be known as a client, a patient, or a person living with a condition such as HD. And depending on which part of the system you're in, if you are a hospital person, you would be a patient. If you're living in a residential care facility in aged care, you're a resident. If you are simply in the community, you might be called a person living with Huntington's disease. Sometimes the word customer is also used, but consumer is the general term accepted, certainly at the Commonwealth government level, for people with the condition. Sitting next to them are carers. Now, a carer can be a family member, maybe a friend, a supporter, a neighbor, a person living with the person with the condition, generally an unpaid role, a role that is fulfilled through love and care for the person, not for a wage or for a particular work reason. Also in the mix, we have service providers. And if you're in the NDIS or the aged care system or the health or medical health or mental health service, typically your service would be registered or accredited or both. And whichever service it is, it must meet certain government standards. Inside service provider organizations, there are care workers. Now, these are different from carers because care workers may be volunteers. They're usually more likely to be paid, but they're working for an organization, not for you as an individual. The care workers would be subject to audit and performance controls and employment standards. And they should understand something about the condition of the person that's being cared for. The organization, the service provider, should also have some level of understanding about, in our situation, about how to properly care for somebody with Huntington's disease. Now, I want to speak a bit about the disability side of things, primarily National Disability Insurance Scheme. And we still have an ageist approach to this scheme, and you have to be under 65 to be eligible for the NDIS. If you're over 65, look somewhere else while we're talking through this slide, because unfortunately this won't refer to you. You also may become eligible for the disability support pension, and slightly different age criterion there. You have to be under 66 years of age. The important thing to note that it's not easy to get either into the NDIS as a participant or to become a disability support pensioner. The process involves lots of hoops, lots of obstacles, lots of forms. And if you're a person living alone with Huntington's disease, it can be extremely frustrating and difficult to get the forms properly filled in with the right sort of documentation to become either an NDIS participant or a disability support pensioner. One of the things that we would love to be able to do is give people more help to engage with the NDIS and the disability support pension. There are mechanisms to do that, and I'll come to that in a bit more detail shortly. Under the NDIS, there are things that the Quality and Safeguards Commission, which is the body that's independent of the NDIS, but is there to make sure that people can complain about services and to ensure that services are provided in a way that is appropriate and meets certain standards. So the NDIS has practice standards and quality indicators, and these apply to all NDIS services, whether the services are accredited or not. You have to be a registered provider to be able to bill people for NDIS services. And the Commission is responsible for ensuring that these services are met. Here's the phone number for the Commission. And if you have any concerns or wish to raise a complaint, a formal complaint about the service provider, this is the place to go. Within aged care, there's been a lot of change recently around aged care, primarily driven, I think, by the recently released Royal Commission report. There are currently 8 aged care standards. They try to focus the provider on the needs of the consumer rather than the needs of the service. And again, there is a Quality and Safety Commission. This is the phone number. And again, if you have a complaint, or you wish to raise an issue about a particular provider, this is the place to go. Now, quite often people feel a bit daunted by lodging a formal complaint and are concerned that maybe the provider will victimize them as a result of the complaint and make life harder for them. Under the legislation, they're not allowed to victimize you, but it can be daunting, it can be a little bit concerning. So the federal government funds independent advocacy services. Under aged care, there's a single umbrella group called OPAN, Older Persons Advocacy Network, with different providers in each state and territory, but one single entry point, a 1-800 number, 1-800-700-600, and a website. And they can provide you support to talk through your issue, to help to negotiate the response to the issue from the provider, without having to formalize it as a complaint. But if you do want to formalize it as a complaint, the advocacy service can support you making the complaint, can also support you complaining about the complaint service itself. And in the disability world, the peak body is called Disability Advocacy Network Australia, dana.org.au, that is correct website. I haven't put a phone number there because the disability sector has a lot more different providers offering the disability advocacy services across states and territories. So the best way to access their services is to go to their website, dana.org.au, and look up the location where you are or the type of service you want. Unfortunately, at this time, there are no services that specialize in progressive neurological conditions such as Huntington's disease. So you end up with a mainstream provider. There are also other advocacy services. For example, there are mental health advocacy services, there are justice advocacy services, and they're also useful. For example, if you or your person with Huntington's end up in the criminal justice system, which happens all too frequently, somebody with Huntington's might get arrested. The justice advocacy service in some states, not all, can be of assistance to you. The other key resource is the Huntington's Disease State Association. So I work for Huntington's New South Wales ACT. A little bit later, we're going to hear from my counterpart from Western Australia, but there is a state association in each state and territory. And they are owned, by and large, they're owned by the community. So they're an association of members. That means that they belong to you. You are, if you are a member of the association, you are the owner of the association. And members can influence how the associations operate, what they do, how they do it. They also look to the membership to support the association. Now, associations will try and generate funding through fundraising, through government grants, through foundations and corporate donations and bequests and all sorts of things. But very often, support from members will help the viability of those state bodies. But one of the things that the associations do, and at the moment each state association's got a slightly different mix of services, they will try to advocate on your behalf where possible, where it makes sense for them to do that rather than for an independent advocacy service. And you can always ring them and ask for their advice. They may well end up referring you to an advocacy service if that makes most sense. One of the things that this talk is trying to do, and what I think the association's trying to do, is to empower you so that you can be your own best advocate. And we'll hear a little bit later on from one of them, from our speaker, Julie Burgess, who is going to talk about being an advocate for her in her family situation. So I've got a link there just to our website, and the page showing there has got links to all the other state associations. But if you just Google, if you just go onto your web server and your whatever search engine you like and type in Huntington's Western Australia or Huntington's Queensland, whatever it might be, you'll get to the right place. Now, I wanted to just give you a few examples of where people from Huntington's community, from the Huntington's community, from Huntington's families have come together to express solidarity, I guess. And in New South Wales, we have an annual Walk for Hope. Now, this picture is from 2019, and we didn't run the walk very much at all last year because of COVID-19. But here we have a picture of, I think there were altogether about 500 people. They're not all in the picture. Some of them are busy doing other things, but these people all came together on a sunny afternoon in Parramatta to Walk for Hope. We walked around Parramatta Park, we raised money, we raised awareness, had a lot of support from the local Member of Parliament and from local businesses who wanted to participate in the process. So while this is something that's only currently done in New South Wales and the ACT, it gives you an idea that people with Huntington's and people from Huntington's families actually do enjoy getting together to maintain and build their relationships with each other. We like to think of ourselves in some ways as one very large family. In Western Australia, this was a picture taken not that long ago of people lining up, don't know whether it's a golf course, not sure exactly where it was, but an aerial view of what the CAG gene looks like. And my counterpart from WA may be able to shed a bit more light on that picture when she gets onto the panel later on. But again, just a way of celebrating the togetherness of the Huntington's community. I chose this slide because while there aren't any people in it, it's important in reflecting on, for those who were at the last session on advocacy, political advocacy is important. And the it's called the Huntington Disease Society of America, is lobbying with the support of federal politicians to pass what's called the HD Parity Act, to ensure that if you have a diagnosis of Huntington's disease, you don't have to wait an additional 2 years to access Medicare benefits, which is currently the situation for most people who get sick in the USA. And this last one is from the Scottish Huntington's Association. And those of you who were in the last session will remember the CEO of Scottish Huntington's Association, Alistair Hoare, talking about the National Huntington's Care Framework. And this was a group of people from the association getting together to make the point that they are all joined at the hip, so to speak, to ensure that good care for Huntington's actually becomes better. And there's no reason why people with Huntington's shouldn't receive high quality care, as long as those who are providing the care understand what they need to do, how they need to do it, and their staff have the right training and skills and qualifications. Now, I'm going to finish off with just a couple of questions. What do we want as a group? What do the Huntington's, the community want? Well, we understand that we want quality care for people with Huntington's disease, quality support for families and carers of people with Huntington's disease, delivered by people who understand Huntington's disease. One of the biggest complaints we've had in New South Wales and ACT when we run our community surveys over the last couple of years was this point: the people caring for our person with Huntington's disease doesn't understand the condition and therefore can't provide quality care. So if that's what we want, how do we get it? Well, individual advocacy to service providers, whether it's you talking to the provider and actually explaining how you think that they might better care for your person with Huntington's disease, whether it's advocacy with the support of an advocacy organization, one of the independent advocacy groups, or advocacy by making a formal complaint about the service to the various commissions. The second way we will get this is through systemic advocacy to politicians and government agencies. And noisy visibility. Now, that's an interesting idea, noisy visibility. And I know from my own experience working in advocacy over many years that it's the most successful advocacy is when something's flashed across the front page of the paper and there's a headline of the nightly news, because the minister tends to respond by saying, do whatever it takes to get it off the front page. Now, we know that Huntington's is a small issue in terms of the numbers of people involved. We've got people with dementia numbering now 450,000, people with Huntington's numbering 2,000. So we're never going to be a really big ticket item in terms of policy agendas, but there's no reason why we shouldn't get people to understand that Huntington's is a really hard, difficult disease to care for, to live through, and that it shouldn't be stigmatized. It's not our fault that we have Huntington's disease. And the more we can stand up as a community and ask that our needs be taken into account and properly enumerated, properly funded so that a carer can be provided in the right way, the better we're going to end up having care for our person with Huntington's disease and for carers as well. That's all I want to say today. Thank you very much for your time. Please remember to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You'd be welcome to contact me. Probably best if you're from New South Wales ACT to contact me or my counterpart in other state associations. If you're from one of the other states, you probably know where to find them, but we do love you getting in touch with us and hope to hear from you soon. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Lewis. If I could ask our other people, Lenny and Rob and Julie, just to come on and do deaf sign clapping to Lewis. because I think that was a really excellent presentation, full of practical information and numbers to ring and so on. Now you can disappear again. That's right. Thank you so much, Lewis. And Lewis will rejoin us for our panel session. And that question he's asked, what do we want? I would be most interested in you putting some comments just off the top of your head in the chat. It would be fantastic to see, certainly as the MC, this being in my third webinar as part of this Australian National Conference. I have heard a hunger for specialist housing, residential housing, with staff who are specially trained and who care in their heart and wish to work with people with Huntington's disease. And we saw a marvellous example at an earlier segment from Denmark of just what can be achieved when specialist housing that isn't aged care housing when people aren't aged, and where people are imaginative and creative in their care was, extremely encouraging. So your thoughts on what we want, what you want, would be fantastic.